Alright, hello and welcome to another little Yu-Gi-Oh! Talky discussion-y thingy. Terrible intro as always because I add a lot of extra words that mean nothing, but today we're going to be talking about some extra tokens because scapegoats, segues. But yes, today we're going to be talking about Scapegoat, which ended up being one of the kind of weirder stories of links coming out where obviously they announced tokens could be used and Scapegoat was there, but it was kind of slow and not many people wanted to use it, and then we all kind of saw like just an end phase Scapegoat could do a lot for a deck. However, can it do enough, and does it do enough to warrant being hit on the ban list? And that's what I'm going to be talking about today, but my opinion has changed a couple times on the card, and especially with some new cards that have just been released, it's changing a little bit more once again. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into this one. So let's start with the pros of Scapegoat, the things that it does well and the reasons people run it. Now, obviously, the best thing about this card is it's essentially a free link 4, although it does have other options as well. The most famous combo obviously being, the misses, double link spider into Vorload. You can also use it to make Saryuja. You can go ahead and make some link 3s like Ningirsu, or you can make Ningirsu or Ib actually with another monster. You can make Curious, and obviously Foolish card, which is pretty insane as well. And there's just a lot of different things you can do with this card, and a lot of different options it has as well, with most of them being quite powerful, but not overwhelming options. Obviously Curious being able to Foolish is very good, Ningirsu is an amazing card, and Vorload is an amazing card. But those cards alone aren't enough to actually win you a game or overwhelm your opponent. They have to be working in combination with something else. And also, despite it obviously being you having to set it and wait a turn, especially if you're going first and they can't snipe it out during your end phase, it is a chainable card. So if it comes to their turn and they use a Phoenix or a Cyclone or something to go ahead and hit your back row, you can just chain it. Hopefully after battle phase, but if not, I mean, they can take out a few tokens, but you still have them there. It's still chainable, which is definitely a very important factor of the card, but it doesn't have to be end phase or anything like that, so they can't just snipe it out and then you lose out on the resources there. And even if they hit a few of them, it's still some free monsters to use for link summoning, which we all know that just having sometimes one monster for link summoning with things like Junk Forward and such can be a very powerful thing. And there's kind of one more thing that's a pro that I'm going to talk about at the end actually, but for now that's kind of what I saw about the card. On the surface it's quite ridiculous, but as I was making this list and listing the pros and cons, I found a lot more cons to the card than actually pros to the card, which we'll actually go ahead and get into now. So first of all, opening multiples of the card isn't that good. Obviously if they snipe one before battle phase, you could wait and then use another one during the end phase, but then they kind of know you have another one and can play around it from there. But just opening multiple copies generally isn't that good. Also, this is another con where it takes up at least 3 spots in the extra deck, 4 counting whatever you go into, if you're using the standard combo of misses and double link spider there. Meaning you really aren't going to be running multiple packages for multiple Scapegoats, because you don't want to take up that much extra space, and you're kind of limited to going into like a firewall or something like that if you happen to resolve a second one. It also limits you to having a field space of 4 open spots, meaning you can't make a board and use this card, you can't spam out anything on the field, you can't bring out a boss monster and something else or whatever, and it's limited to certain decks that really just kind of have a normal summon that kind of put one monster on board. And sure, you can put multiple monsters on board, and if they destroy them, then you can Scapegoat, but that's relying on your opponent, and things get a little iffy if you start relying on your opponent to do something. Also, the card's just, on the surface, quite slow. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a very fast game. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game where you can get killed extremely fast, and games can be over even on this, turn 2, sometimes even turn 1. But it does have to be set, you do have to wait, and even though you can flip it if they snipe it and you're protected for a turn, you're just protected for a turn. You basically just activated like a Wabaku or something, but even worse if they can out all the tokens. So it definitely does have that slowness to it where you have to draw, you have to set it, and it's really mostly only good going into turn 1, because if you're going into turns 3 and 4 and such without a board, you don't have that good of a chance anyway. unless you're playing a very specific or certain deck that can function with, you know, just back row or something of that nature. One more downfall of the card is you can't summon other monsters that turn, so because this Scapegoat actually fits most well into a very specific type of deck, which is a stun deck, things like Trickstars and such. Those decks also have some other cards, like the artifacts you might want to run that you're not able to because you can't summon other cards during the turn you Scapegoat. If you're playing Trickstars, you can't reincarnation something back to protect yourself. You'd have to flip the Scapegoat because then you wouldn't be able to activate it because you just summoned something else. And then, although it's not the most prevalent aspect of the card, it is certainly a drawback to it. It also prevents things like Altergeists from playing it because you'd be summoning the Multi-Faker, and even though you can bounce one back, putting yourself down to 1, you still summon something that turn, so you wouldn't actually be able to activate it. So, kind of the overall points of this card. One thing it does do is it promotes playing past turn 1, and this is something I didn't really think of myself, but actually got from one of my friends. Is it's a card that makes it so you think past turn 1. You're not just setting up your board turn 1, hoping they don't out it, and then trying to kill them next turn. You're thinking into the later game. You're thinking what you're going to go into with these, what option you're going to take, what play you're going to make, and it promotes more than just here's my board, break it, or you know, it just gives another layer of aspect to actually thinking forward in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, which sometimes it feels like we're lacking, especially with some things like extra links being quite prevalent right now. It also helps slower decks, and although, you know, most of the time we talk about things like Card of Demise and such that can help rogue decks or that also help meta decks even more, this is one card that doesn't exactly have that because of the restrictions laid upon it. It does help certain meta decks, but it also helps a lot of kind of slower decks as well, and although stun decks might not be everyone's favorite, this is something that you could run in those decks to add a little bit of the power that they are missing. And again, they might not be everyone's favorite, but this definitely is a boost for some decks like that that fixes a bit of a problem that they have. So overall, as I was making this list of pros and cons, my opinion changed from I kind of want this card hit to I don't see a need for it to be hit as much. It's very powerful, but again, it has a lot of restrictions, and on its own, it's not, you know, an end-all, be-all of the game. However, the release of Nightmares has changed things a little bit, and especially when it comes to Trickstars, because just in what I've heard and doing a little bit of testing myself, I've noticed that just having Candina and Lycoris, or access to, you know, either of those two cards in combo in your hand, and a Scapegoat actually leads to an extra link because of the way the Nightmares can. It also lets you out a monster, a back row. It can help you push for game because you're outing cards like that. You can then, you know, out stuff and then use the Nightmares to go into other things. And because of the fact that they can extra link so easily like that, because of the fact that it adds so much power, it lets you draw, it's, you know, essentially giving you pops and things for free. I think that's what kind of really defines this card. In Flames of Destruction, that's the new set, I think. I would say that this card, the Scapegoat, is actually pretty fine for the game, but with the release of Nightmares and with Trickstars being untouched and looking to be a force for this new meta coming up, especially with things like Brandish, they can, you know, use Reincarnation quite well to snipe out some important cards in that matchup. Brandish Sky Striker, I'll use the real name here. It's definitely a very strong deck, and I think that this card is obviously best used in that deck. They can, you know, just put one Lycoris on field, have their back row ready to go, have their hand traps ready to go, and have an extra link and some massive power waiting for next turn. And again, the card itself isn't that great, but actually even with the Nightmares alone, Scapegoat can still, you know, pop 2 cards and draw some cards and do some very kind of powerful things now, essentially almost on its own, especially with Goblin. You know, if you just have one other card that works with it, it becomes very powerful and possibility of an extra link appears. And so I think that that's kind of the line where it hits, and because of just how much power an extra link carries and how much power the Nightmares carry, I think that on the next list it might be time for Scapegoat to see a hit. As for where I think it should be, I think it's 3 or nothing. Usually I don't take a 3 or nothing stance on cards. I think that 3 or nothing generally isn't a very good line of logic, but I'd rather have Scapegoat be a part of the game or be at 0 than be a Saki one of. And that's kind of at the end of the day, so I think that on the next list, if the nightmares keep prevailing and if trick stars keep prevailing, then I think it may be time for the card to see some attention on the list. But again, this is all just speculation, and it's just some early looks at what it can do. Obviously, we still have a lot of time going into this new format and new meta, so time will tell what will happen to the buddies. But anyway, usual plugs down in the description. Gotta get that YouTuber point going on. Twitter, Patreon, Discord, all that lovely stuff. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Went to do that little thing I do at the end way too early.